Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores the psychological principles behind why we do what we do. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan.
On today's episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Wes Adams and Tamara Miles, co-authors of the book Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee.
Their book explores what creates meaning at work through a framework that they call the 3 C's: community, contribution, and challenge.
That's right, Tim. Tamara Miles brings a unique perspective to this conversation. She was originally a productivity consultant for 15 years before going back to graduate school to specifically study meaningful work after noticing what she called a virtuous cycle where meaningful work led to more energy and better productivity.
Yeah, and Wes Adams partners with Tamara in researching how leaders can intentionally create an environment where employees find more meaning, which drives better business results.
Yeah, and what I found fascinating in our conversation was how they discovered that leaders are responsible for almost half of the experience of meaning at work, showing how critical leadership is in creating these meaningful environments.
Yeah, they also share some wonderful stories about companies like Ritz-Carlton that empower their employees to create meaningful moments for their customers, which in turn makes the work more meaningful for the employees themselves.
That's virtuous cycle thing, right? There you go. So the research shows that when all 3 elements, community, contribution, and challenge are present, there's a multiplier effect that amplifies meaning. And when one is missing, it can actually cancel out the benefits of the other 2.
Yeah. Now, this episode is one that we thoroughly enjoyed, not just because of great behavioral science insights, but because of how this can have an impact on how Kurt and I do our own consulting.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things, one of the wonderful things about the show, Tim, is that we get to capture the wisdom and insights of all of our wonderful guests. And then we get to apply that wisdom in our work with clients, whether that's about meaning at work or driving change inside the organization or engaging your employees more fully in their jobs. We bring the insights of over 400 researchers and practitioners to you when you hire us.
Yeah. So if you have issues in your work that involve people, pretty much any people problems, we can probably help you out.
Yeah. So just reach out and we'd be happy to talk.
Absolutely. But right now, we invite you to sit back with a fresh pour of meaningful work and enjoy our conversation with Wes Adams and Tamara Miles. Wes and Tamara, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you. We're delighted to be here.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us this morning. And I'm going to start with Tamara. I want to just find out, which would you prefer to ride, a bicycle or a unicycle?
Oh, neither.
Okay, we're starting off on a great foot.
I prefer to ride a car or walk. But
fair enough.
if I had to, I would say bicycle for sure.
I'd like to see you on a unicycle, actually.
I know. It was one of our COVID purchases. You know how like people bought random things during COVID? My husband purchased a unicycle. It showed up at the house and it was like something we tried. Yeah, really.
Well, you
You've
never
seen
told
it?
me that.
All right, Wes, next time you're here, you're going to try the unicycle.
But you never tried it?
We've asked this question a handful of times, and I think anybody that we've ever asked, nobody has actually ever owned a unicycle.
We own a unicycle, but
yeah.
I will say my husband's a big cyclist. You know, he does
Okay.
like those bike races and mountain biking and all the bikings. And so it makes sense that we would add that to the collection.
But you're not. So this is not a
No,
shared. This is not a shared activity that you guys do.
I grew up in a high rise in a big city in Brazil with no opportunities really to ride bikes and learn how to ride bikes. So I never really learned until my mid 20s. And so I'm slightly terrified of it. So that's why I prefer to not.
So I share your same experience with bicycles. They kind of terrify me. I can ride, but I grew up on a farm with horses, and I was like, why would I ride a bike when I can get on the back of a horse?
Right.
It's so much better.
Right.
So, okay. Too much
All right,
information.
Wes, I'm going to ask you a different question.
All right.
All right. Do you prefer coffee or tea?
Oh, I prefer coffee, but I should drink tea.
What do you mean
Coffee
should?
gets me really excited in the morning, and then I crash in the afternoon. And so then I have to drink more of it, and it's a cycle that doesn't end up working out in my best interest. And so if I can exercise, self-regulation in the morning. And I've been on a matcha kick lately. And so that's been working. It hits a little bit differently. It's a little more of a steady energy throughout the day. So
you're not doing the, not decaffeinated coffee that doesn't work. Is that why? Yeah. All right. There you go. Why? I got it. I should have known
What's
that
the
answer.
Point?
I should have just known that. I don't know why I even asked. All right. Never mind.
Okay. Tamara, true false question for you. The contribution to something meaningful is more important to employee satisfaction than financial compensation.
I don't know if we have data. I mean, we have data that people say that, people would take a more meaningful job for less money. So yes, people prioritize those aspects of like contributing to something larger than the self more. But that said, I don't want listeners to think that should be an excuse or a permission to pay people less because they're doing something meaningful. That is kind of like the dirty side of meaningful work. Fairness and dignity is table stakes. And then contribution and highlighting those and connecting those dots is what really fuels motivation.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. We'll dig into that, I think, a little bit more as we move on. Last of our speed round questions, ping-ponging back to you, Wes. Is it possible for any job, no matter how routine, to be meaningful?
Absolutely. And I think we've seen this proven out in our research and the interviews that we've done. We've talked to, accountants, janitors, hairstylists, people that work at fast food companies, along with, a range of other professions. And so moments of meaning are possible in every job, every day, if we know where to look, and especially with the guidance of a great leader, which I hope we're going to dig into a little bit more.
Fantastic. All right.
Absolutely. Well, we are talking with Wes Adams and Tamara Miles about their new book, Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. Let's start with a big picture question here. What do we mean? What do you two mean by meaningful work?
So the way we define meaningful work is through the framework of the 3 C's, which is what we highlight in the book and is what emerged in our data. And those 3 C's are community, contribution, and challenge. And so we define meaningful work as work that provides a sense of community, that allows us to contribute to something outside ourselves, and that challenges us to learn and grow. And we can dig into all the C's in more detail.
Well, we will, and we should. But it's interesting because to some degree, meaning is something that's highly personal, right? Like this is something that we get to define on a very individual basis. So, coming up with this idea of challenge, community, and contribution, am I right in assuming that when it comes to what's going to be meaningful for me, it could be different than what's meaningful for you or for Kurt or for Wes, right?
I think that's a very interesting question. And the data actually shows that, we come from different perspectives. And of course, we have different preferences, but all 3 of these things are important to all of us. And, there's some research on, for example, different generations. What does Gen Z think about meaningful work versus boomers, right? And, I think there's still more research to be done there, but the data indicates that we all define it similarly and we're all looking for it, right? And so at the beginning of your career, you might be more interested in challenge. You want to learn and grow. And so you might be a little bit more focused on that. But community and contribution are still really important. And at the end of your career, you might have had enough challenge. You might be thinking more about your contribution. So I think all of them are important at all stages, but some may take a little more priority for folks.
So, Wes, it sounds like to a certain degree that it's a mix of those 3 at any point, and at any one point, one might be more relevant to where I am in my life cycle or who I am or the context that I'm in compared to others. And again, Tim might have a different mix of those, but the 3 are always going to be a part of it. Did I capture that right?
Absolutely. And what we found actually is that there's a multiplier effect there. So when all 3 are there, they kind of amplify each other and they work in concert. And if one of them is missing, it can cancel out the other two. And so this is something that we've seen in, for example, nonprofit jobs, very high in contribution. Typically, you're working towards a larger purpose, and hopefully you're seeing, the impact that your work is having there. But if it's a toxic workplace and you don't get along with your employees and you don't feel valued, it can really cancel out the meaning that comes from that job. So all three of these things are important.
Very interesting.
I wanted to bounce back to Tamara to let. I'd like to lay a foundation for these three C's so that we can get into sort of this compounding effect and how in aggregate they work together. But Tamara, could you take a minute and share with us sort of the salient points for each of the three C's?
Absolutely. So community is really about a sense of belonging to a community of shared values and the feeling that you can show up authentically and share parts of yourself that are important to you, and also your full set of ideas that you're not holding back, right? And so community says, I matter here. Contribution is about feeling like what you do makes a difference, right? That you're doing something, you're contributing. And so community says, what I do matters here. And challenge is really about feeling like leaders in the organization are invested in developing you, in your growth and in your learning. And so challenge says, my growth matters here. And so those are, go ahead.
Yeah. How is it, Wes implied this, Tamara, I just want to continue to follow this through. Why is it that those are the three things that appear to be more universal? What did your research indicate to you?
So to kind of go back to the individuality of meaning, right? That's a really interesting point that you highlighted, because most of the research that was done prior to our research was done from exactly that perspective. Like, how can I, as an individual, increase my own sense of meaning? And we were really curious to understand, does the organizational structure, do these things play a role? And if so, what is the role, right? So that's kind of what we set out to find. And we actually found that leaders are responsible for almost half of the experience of meaning at work. So it's a huge influence. And so while we were discovering that impact, we also then discovered, what are leaders doing intentionally to create this sense of meaning? Why, first of all, why do they care? Like, why do leaders think it's important? And what is it that they do? And those were the themes that we heard again and again, about trying to build a sense of community, really fostering relationships across the organization, getting to know people at a personal level, really highlighting their contributions, recognizing them, thanking them, and then really beautiful stories about seeing potential in people that they might not even see for themselves yet, and then nudging them towards that potential, like helping people reach their full potential. So we heard all these stories, and they sounded amazing to us. But then we were like, well, let's ask people. It's one thing for the leaders to tell us that they're doing these things to create meaning, but let's go ask people if these things actually make work meaningful for them. So that was the second phase of our study. That's when we went to thousands of people across 25 industries, and we asked them, okay, if your leaders do X, Y, and Z, like these practices that we were hearing that fall under the three C's, when they do this, do you feel like work is meaningful? And it was very clear that those three C's make work meaningful.
It's an interesting piece that you're talking about. And I loved how you talked about the leaders and how they're doing the different pieces of this in the work that I've done. We go in and work with organizations as well. One of the things that often presents a challenge is some leaders are fully on board with some of these things and others are not. So I'm sure you ran into leaders who are going, why should I even care about meaning? Why do I need to even think about these three C's? Wes, what would you say to a leader that if they're kind of having some doubts about this? It's like, I just need to pay people and they should just do the job that I pay them to do. as opposed to kind of building this meaning? What benefits does meaning have?
I mean, I would say to someone like that, and to be fair, like we don't encounter as many of those people as you might think these days.
Good.
I think there's
Good.
a much more recognition that these things are important and that they drive business results, right? Because the data is very clear on that. So if there is any question, I usually start with the data that shows that these things drive the outcomes that we're looking for, both at the employee level, engagement, productivity, well-being, job satisfaction, but also at the team and at the organizational level. So things like performance, innovation, creativity, bottom line revenue. There's amazing research, longitudinal research out of Oxford that came out last year showing that when employees are high in these meaning indicators, companies outperform in the stock market. So there's just a lot of data there. Now, sometimes that's not enough to convince people because they're just like, oh, I don't believe in this soft stuff, um, and so typically in that case, if there's an opportunity, I try to get them to use a practice, and to see how that works, because I think that's very compelling. And when you see it in action and you understand how it impacts just like the culture and the way that people work together. And I think it's clear, like if you're just focused on paying people and trying to have a transaction with them, they're not sticking around. They have no loyalty to you. They're not giving you their best work. They might take the job and they might stay, but it's not the money that gets them to perform at their best or work their hardest or come up with their best ideas. It's because they believe in what they're doing, because they think the job is meaningful.
Yeah. So this trend in quiet quitting could actually be reversed, or at least muted, with getting more meaning into the work. Is that fair to say, Wes?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a statistic that we like to quote, research from Gallup and WorkHuman that came out recently. And this is in the contribution bucket, that's around just showing people appreciation, right, for the work that they're doing, letting them know their work matters, saying thank you. And one thank you once a week cut disengagement and burnout in half. One thank you once a week from a manager. That was enough, right? And because that's a meaningful moment when somebody says, hey, that work that you did, thank you for that. That mattered, right? And I think less than 40% of people felt like they were appropriately recognized for their work.
Which again is really always surprising whenever I see those Gallup surveys and the work human components out there, and you see the low engagement rates and you see those things, and then you know that there are not, I wouldn't say they're simple fixes, because it's an unmeaningful thank you that isn't a real thank you, probably doesn't have the same impact, and so you got to put some effort into it, but they're not overly challenging. Things like you don't have to put a whole new technology system in that's going to cost millions of dollars. It is literally some actions that you can do as a leader. So with that, what are some other pieces that leaders can be thinking about or doing to help bring that, like you said, a simple thank you every week? What else is there that you guys found?
So in the community, the most powerful question that we asked in our study that predicted a sense of community was, does your leader care about what's happening in your life outside of work? Not does your leader know, right? Does your leader care about?
Yeah.
And people, like, we all want to be noticed, to be seen, right? To feel like we matter. And when a leader comes in on Monday and says, hey, how did the weekend go? You mentioned your kid was going to be in a soccer tournament. How was the tournament? How did the team do? Right? That matters, because you're like, oh my gosh, they remembered, like, my kid's soccer tournament, right? That little 30-second interaction really makes us feel seen. It makes us feel like we want to do the work, not just because of the work, but because of the people we work with, right? That we're in it for the team, that we're in it together. And again, those are very simple, not always easy, because we're all so busy meeting to email to putting out fires, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah, you're kind of teeing up something that was on Kurt's and my mind when we were reading the book about that this is a remarkable transformational period in work these days.
Mm.
How does that impact us? How do we, if we're going through this transformation in the work world, how can we leverage meaning in a way that can positively impact our employee experience and, of course, the effectiveness of our organizations as well?
I think this is you said transformational. I think we're sort of realizing with all the confluence of factors coming together, remote and hybrid that we're still figuring out, all the different generations in the workplace, AI completely disrupting people strategy and org design. Not to mention like crazy things happening in the economy and the political sphere. We're really, it's clear that the old model of work doesn't work anymore, right? This is a model that was based on, it's the Ford factory model. We've been iterating on it for 100 years. And it was really good at having a group of people do one task over and over again, and another group of people supervise that group of people to make sure that they were doing it correctly over and over again, right? And that's the model that we use. All of the organizations that currently exist have iterated on that model to some degree, right? And I think if we take a step back and we look at how can we use the tools that we have and how can we take what we know about what motivates people and also the future of work, which isn't about doing the same thing over and over again, right? What worked yesterday is definitely not going to work tomorrow. And so for that, we need the most human of skills to succeed. We need innovation, creativity. We need people who are resilient, who are adaptable. And if we want to unlock those high level human skills, we need to give people a reason to show up, to really fully engage, to work hard, and to stretch themselves to the limits of their capabilities. And for that, we need work to be meaningful.
Hey Groovers, quick break from the conversation to talk about something we don't bring up enough on the show.
Yeah, that's right. When we're not behind the mic, we're working with organizations to apply behavioral science in ways that actually move the needle for leaders, teams, and whole cultures.
So whether it's designing smarter incentives, boosting engagement, setting goals that actually stick, or helping teams navigate change, we bring real science to real workplace challenges.
And we don't just talk theory. Our approach blends research-backed insights with hands-on strategies that drive results. Now, we've seen small behavioral shifts lead to big wins in Fortune 500 companies and scrappy startups and even in mission-driven nonprofits.
Yeah, and we bring the same curiosity, creativity, and care to our client work that we bring to every episode of the show.
Really, I think people might want more than what we bring to the show.
You probably have a point there. You're probably right.
Okay, so we'll bring more care and creativity to our work with you and your teams than what we do on the show.
Yes, more care. So if you're ready to build stronger motivation, better team dynamics, and maybe even make your workplace a little more groovy,
yeah, reach out to us. Grab us on LinkedIn or Facebook, or just drop us a line. We'd love to help you and your team find your groove.
I think that is absolutely, I think key is you're bringing this up, and I really liked how that was going. One piece in the book that I really liked, and Tamara, you said this idea about a virtuous cycle that you observed during productivity consulting, where meaningful work led to more energy and more productivity, and that just hit me. That idea that it was this. It's not just like getting meaning and then you're. It's like it kept building on itself. And so, could you help our listeners understand what you meant by that and how that happens?
Yeah. So, before diving into the research and studying meaningful work, I had spent 15 years doing productivity consulting. I had written my first book on a productivity model, and I was working with leaders on setting up systems, within organizations to kind of help unlock productivity. And it was really interesting because, like for me, the way I view productivity and have always viewed productivity is not just about doing more things in less time, which is kind of like the common narrative around productivity, the toxic kind of,
Yeah.
productivity. But it's always about doing more of what matters, getting the important things done, right, in the time that we have. And so I was noticing that the organizations that I worked with, those individuals all of a sudden had more mind space, more clarity. They weren't just always reacting and putting out fires, but they were able to focus on those things that matter most. They were able to do strategic planning and organizational culture or whatever it was for them. And sometimes it was even in their personal lives that they were able to volunteer or spend more time with their family. So they really focused on those things that mattered most. And then what happened is that they became much more energized. They were much more engaged. They really wanted to show up, and they just showed up differently. They didn't just show up, right? They lit up, and then they were more productive, and they were getting more things that mattered done, and then they were feeling more energized and more. And it was this cycle, and I was really curious to understand the science behind that. I didn't really know that there was a whole science of meaningful work. In my first book, I called it possibility. Like, all these possibilities are opening up. Like, what is this? And so that's what I saw in action, and then went back to graduate school to study what became meaningful work. And then I saw that in the data. And then we see this every time, like, we work with leaders and they unlock this meaning, and it really has a lasting effect as well. Sometimes because meaning is not just about intensity. Sometimes you have like a very intense, meaningful moment. But it's also about frequency. Wes was talking about these everyday moments that matter, right?
Yeah.
And both really add up to kind of fuel our motivation.
I just want to say it's a pretty high level of curiosity to ask a question and say, I'm going to go to grad school to answer that. Like, that's
Curiosity is definitely one of Tamara's
most
top
people,
strengths.
It is. It's one of my signature character strengths. I found out at MAP as well.
There you go. It's like most people are curious, so they pick up the phones like, oh, I'm going to get an answer to that right now, and then just move on. But
Googled this. I'm done. There you go. No, let's go and get a graduate degree on this. That's great.
Yeah, that is very impressive.
Thank you.
I don't. Did either of you look in this virtuous cycle piece? You talk about how it works in different pieces, but any research or any looking into the psychological mechanisms around why that happens? And I don't know. I don't remember reading that in the book, but if there was,
That's a great question, Tamara. I don't know if I think in other like some of the other things we learned in positive psychology, there's evidence for that circular reinforcement of, you feel good when you do something, and so you keep doing that thing that makes you feel good, or one thing unlocks another. But
there's broaden and build, right? Which is, I think, what you're talking about. So the broaden and build theory of positive emotions from Barbara Fredrickson, it states that positive emotions, right, broaden our perspective, our repertoire, and then over time it builds our resources. And so let's say we experience fulfillment, right, meaning, something really kind of sparks. Let's say we met a beneficiary of our work. Right. So maybe we are working at a biotech company developing drugs, and we got to meet a patient whose life was changed for the better because of a drug we have spent years developing. Right. That's one of the intense moments of meaning. Right. When we have that experience, we feel awe, elevation. There's a suite of positive emotions. What happens is that when we experience positive emotions, it builds our resources over time. For example, when we feel awe or gratitude, we tend to become closer with people. We build better relationships. Those relationships help us perform better over time, right? We also become more curious. Then we go and do some research on something. And then that research helps us build our repertoire of practices and tools over time. And so maybe, this is just us positing here, not sure if there's a link, but maybe that's one of the psychological mechanisms in place.
Yeah, you actually use Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson's character tool towards the end of the book. I thought that was actually pretty cool. If people are not familiar with the VIA, via classification and character strengths model, which I think is pretty. I don't know if it's groundbreaking, but it's really well done. Let me just say that these guys did fantastic work on it. Can you tell listeners who are not familiar with it a little bit about that resource and why it's so important at the end of the book to have this capstone concept?
I'm going to jump in on that, and I'm going to
Wes, go ahead.
But Tamara is really our resident VIA expert. So,
well, then why are you even trying, Wes? What is wrong with you?
So VIA is a set of 24 character strengths. So these are strengths that are valued across cultures and across time, that was come to after a period of a number of years of research from, like you said, Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson, who are some of the founders of positive psychology. And these are kind of innate strengths that we have that tend to be easy, energizing for us. They're easy to use, and they're kind of core to who we are. So when you take the VIA classification, it's different than like a strengths finder or something else, which is about how you show up at work. This is more about who you are and like what you're naturally good at, right? And it sort of gives you your top 5 or so strengths, which are your signature strengths. And these are the things, like I said, that are kind of easy, essential, energizing, and that are really the ones that if you can use every day, if you can figure out how to leverage these things in a meaningful way, they give you energy, rather than taking them away. So, for example, like Tamara using her strength of curiosity and going to grad school, while that sounds like a lot of work to some people, was super energizing for her. I know because I was there with her. And for me as well, curiosity is one of my top strengths also, right? And so that's hard work, but it's energizing hard work because you're really getting to do something that kind of like matters to you. So I think it's a really valuable tool that we often use in our consulting work to kick things off and to help people identify what they're good at and what things they can be leaning into more fully at work, and also help them see each other and how they share some strengths and how they complement each other in different ways. And so it's pretty powerful. And what did I miss, Tamara?
Well, I was going to say, Wes, that was a nice try. That was a nice try. Well done.
Thank you.
Good job on trying.
Now let's get the expert.
Get the expert.
I've been studying her for years, and so I think I've got it. Yeah.
Well, I get the benefit of being an instructor in the program. So every year when Ryan Nemec, who works at VIA, who's the lead scientist there, when he comes in to teach the students, I get to hear it all over again. And so, so that's why Wes thinks that I am the resident expert. But the only thing I will say, another key differentiator between the VIA and other strengths assessments is the fact that it is the only peer-reviewed and research-driven assessment there is. There's over 1,000 studies, and they're all published on the VIA website that that study these strengths in different applications at school, at work, in life, in parenting, and so it's a very well-researched tool. There's a lot of data to support it as a tool.
Yeah, which is one of the things I think is really valuable about it. Not just we did a couple surveys and here you go. Here's your strengths and various different pieces around that. So again, for all of our listeners, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, and so you can go out and take a look at it and kind of explore around it. I wanted to get into a different part. You bring up in the book, you bring up all these great examples of actual workplaces and various different things. One of the stories that caught, I think, both Tim and my eye was a story about Ritz-Carlton and their historic, great customer experience. And you give this example of really top-notch guest service, especially when it comes to a plush giraffe for a little boy. Do either of you want to talk about that story? Because it kind of encapsulates, I think, a lot of what you guys are talking about.
That's a really fun story, and it was fun. Also, we got a chance to interview Chris Hearn, who was the subject of that story. And so,
Yeah, cool.
essentially, his family was going on vacation to the Ritz Carlton in Amelia Island, Florida, and
Yep.
he couldn't make it. He had to go to on a business trip, but he met the family back at home, and when he did, when his wife got back with his son, it quickly became apparent that the favorite stuffed animal, a giraffe named Joshi, was not with them. And so, he was young. And I think anyone with kids can relate to the fact that, he had a total meltdown, right? He totally
Yes.
lost his
Yeah.
mind. And so Chris, in an effort to sort of like calm him down, told him, "Oh, he must be have stayed for a couple of extra vacation days at the Ritz," you know, and so that sort of worked. And then he called the manager and was like, have you found this? Like, can you help me out here? And the manager's like, "Yeah, we got it, and we'll ship it to you." And he's like, "Thank you. Like I told my son, that the giraffe was taking a couple of extra vacation days or whatever." And so a couple days later, package arrives. It's got Joshi the giraffe in it, and the son is very happy. But it also has this full photo album of the rest of Joshi's vacation. So they had taken pictures of the giraffes like at the beach tanning. He's like with some other plush animal friends in the bar having some drinks. He's got cucumbers on his eyes in the spa. Like with an actual person giving him a massage. So they like took that idea and really ran with it and turned it into a real story. And at the end of the day, it was like the kid was like, "Oh, sure, that's cool," but it really meant a lot to the dad that they had kind of like made made his little white lie come true. And we tell that story because it's a really great example of how the Ritz Carlton empowers their employees to do things for guests, to solve problems or to see opportunities and do something amazing to create these memorable experiences. So they have this set of values that they teach everyone who works at the Ritz, no matter what level you are, in the organization. You have to abide by these core values of the Ritz Carlton, and then you are empowered to do anything that you think is right to serve guests. And you're also given a budget of $2,000 per incident to do whatever you want, no questions asked. So you don't have to go ask a manager for permission. You don't have to do whatever. So if you see an opportunity like that, like you can just run and go make a thing. You can pay to have the photo album made, do all of that stuff and ship it off, and you don't have to tell anybody about that. And so it's an example of what we call balanced autonomy, really empowering people within the boundaries and guidelines of organizational values to do their work in the way that they think is best. And it creates this, this is in sort of the challenge bucket. It's an opportunity for them to try new things, to experiment, to grow, to stretch, and to really perform in a way that actually benefits the company, because they're getting all these new and interesting ideas that they wouldn't if they were just like in the Ford factory model telling people this is how you have to do things over and over again.
It
Yeah, to
really
think
is a great
about, like,
example.
yeah, that would have never happened if whoever, took that call and then went and did this had to go up 3 layers to get
Oh,
approval
no
to
way.
to
Would have
do
been
the right.
too
That would
annoying.
have just it would have been too long. It would have never happened. And so you can't have those experiences without that, autonomy as you talk about. And I think it's a really, really key piece. And I thought it was really highlighted really, really well in the book. So
It it
Think about
also
being a Ritz Carlton employee
yeah,
that had that idea and rallied all of their coworkers and like, oh my God, let's do this. Imagine the fun of like
yeah,
posing the giraffe, putting the cucumbers, so you're getting to use your creativity. You're connecting with the coworkers. You're imagining how special it's going to be when Joshua arrives with the photo album. And so it's also like the experience of doing it also
yeah.
generates community, right?
yeah.
Fun. And I mean, I think about that all the time. Like, how awesome to be there creating that photo album. Like, I want to do that.
Well, and
Well,
even just, I mean, imagine like the people that are around when the stuffed animal is in the spa with the cucumbers, right? You have to smile and laugh, right? And
yeah.
I don't care if you're an employee, if you're a guest there, whatever it is, you have to do that. And it's, yeah.
So,
You know what?
well,
Can I say something else about that story, because I think it actually comes full circle as well. So the Joshi story is legendary among Ritz Carlton employees, and it's
yeah.
actually a story that they use to tell people, to tell new employees, this is what it's like to work around here. Like
Mm.
this is what our culture is like. And that, there's a section of the book where we focus on recruiting and onboarding, and
Mhm.
how early cues and early practices really set the tone for the life of someone's tenure with an organization, and can be very meaningful in a way that lasts over time, right? And that sort of cultural mastery, that idea of bringing people in and showing them what it's about to work here, is a really powerful part of like bringing them into the fold, bringing them into the community early. And they're like, see, this is the kind of thing that you can do here. This is what we value, right? So telling those stories. So it wasn't just great for, that one client, right? This is something that continues to pay dividends over and over again for years.
Well, and in this case, this is a great example because, as you mentioned, Ritz Carlton has this rich history of doing this kind of thing. Like their organizational structure and their policies are closely aligned with the story. And Tamara, I was wondering if you could just talk to the importance of that, rather than having this disconnect of, well, this is the policy, but yeah, this is kind of how we actually do things.
Yeah, that is the number one meaning killer, and it's really hard to recover, actually. Like, I think we have chapter 3 of the book, right? The foundation of meaningful work. Like, this is really foundational. None of the other practices really work if you don't have this alignment between the words on the wall and how things are actually done around here.
Yeah.
And they came up again and again and again in our research, right? And we've all, I think, had this experience some point in our lives where, you know, the words on the wall are like, oh, teamwork is really important around here, or transparency. We value transparency. And then you are like, well, then why is everybody whispering behind closed doors? Like, what's happening? Like, am I going to get fired? Like, what is going on? Right. And so that is really important for all the other practices to work. And one of the best examples that we heard from the leaders that we interviewed for this came from Rob Waldron, who was the CEO of Curriculum Associates. It's an organization that provides curriculum for K through 12 students around the country, and he talked about how important it is. You know, they have a value driven organization. They have their values listed on the website, and we were asking about the stories behind the values and like how do you actually ensure that you're living these values. And so then he told us about his wedding day. So he got married in Rhode Island on a cliff walk under a tent, and it just happened to be one of the rainiest days in Rhode Island history.
This was
Right?
a great story. This was a great
Right?
story. Yeah.
His wedding day. And the wedding, planner was there, and him and his bride to be, they were all kind of upset about the wedding. You know, you invest so much time, energy, money. You have this dream about what your wedding day is going to be like. And leading up to it, you're looking at the forecast and it's a lot looking good and the anxiety is building. And then the day comes and the forecast is even worse than it was. Right.
Yeah.
And so you're there, you're about to get married, you're freaking out. You're like, oh, this is going to be terrible. The guests are not going to come. Nobody's going to stay. The party's going to suck. And the wedding planner pulled him aside and said, only one person can ruin this wedding, and it's the bride. All eyes will be on you. If you go out and you dance in the rain and you have fun and you don't worry about the mud, you will give everyone permission to laugh about it, to have fun with you, to dance and get muddy. But if you are anxious about it and nervous and apologetic, then it will make everyone anxious and nervous and no one will have fun because everyone follows the bride.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what they did. They had fun. They danced in the mud. Her dress got all dirty. And it was one of the best days of their lives. And it was very memorable. And so Rob always thinks about that when he leads and when he needs to role model and when there are competing values, right? Maybe transparency or maybe clients first and teamwork. are competing, he thinks about that. Everyone follows the bride. All eyes are on me, right? Because the bride is the leader of the wedding, right? He, as a CEO, is the leader of the organization. And he made a point to explain decisions when there were competing values, when you say, our people come first and when you care about teamwork and all of that, but sometimes you have to work all night for several nights to meet a client deadline because client also comes first, right? How do you explain that? And as long as you use spotlight, it's a practice we call spotlighting in the book, and we actually have a free spotlighting worksheet on our website if people want to go through it. But it's really about explaining the decision and how you're upholding your values and why right now it means that we're going to really focus on clients first, and we're going to let teamwork take a back seat. But after we deliver this is really important, and this is why after we deliver it, we're going to do this to build our team up again, or we're going to give everybody a day off, or we're going to do a team, take everybody out to lunch, whatever it is. But just being really intentional and explaining it. But we just love the everyone follows the bride story.
And you bring it back up a couple times in the book, and it's really it is powerful when we think about that simple message. And there's a behavioral science principle called anchoring, where we tend to anchor in on different things. And again, you can anchor in on the emotional component of this. And so as you were talking about this, that was what was going through my head, that that bride, that leader is that anchor. And so however they're looking at something is going to, we know emotions are contagious. And so we know that will transfer in. And then it's just a wonderful kind of illustration of the power that people have, and particularly leaders have in those types of situations. So yeah, it was great.
I wanted to switch over to, and I'm just going to say right now, Tamara, I'm going to pick on you first on this music question, because because you admitted that you have a guitar in your house.
I do. It's collecting dust.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. My personal encouragement is just dust it off a little bit. Just one day, just dust it off. You don't even have to pick it up. Just dust it off, and then see what happens the next day. But if you were to be stuck on a desert island for a year, and you had a listening device, but that listening device could only have 2 artists on it. Now it's their whole catalog, not just one song. It's everything that they've ever recorded. What 2 artists would you take with you?
Okay. So,
by the way, I just have to say, I love the look on Wes's face while
I'm
we're
so
doing
glad that Tamara got that question and not me, because I don't know how I would answer it.
Well, it's coming at you, Wes. You're next.
Okay.
So what I love the most about music is lyrics, right? I'm a word person. I love poetry. And so lyrics are what really speak to me in a song. And so there are 2 artists that I would bring. One is a Brazilian artist, Marisa Monte. I love her library, and her songs are beautiful. And then the other one is very cliche, but it's Taylor Swift. I have 2 teenage daughters, and we listen to Taylor Swift a lot, and we've gone to a bunch of concerts together. And I just love her music, like her poetry, her lyrics, the metaphors she uses. And I actually listen to it a lot for inspiration in my own writing. So, and then my husband always says, why are you writing books instead of writing songs? Like, we could have the trillions of dollars that Taylor Swift has. Go write some songs.
Just be the next Taylor Swift.
Exactly.
Yeah. So simple. So simple. Yeah. Well, and there has to be something with that too, that you have that, my child also big Taylor Swiftie, and there is that connect. I haven't had a chance to go to a concert, but you do have those shared memories too. That also elicits, even just probably listening to that music probably brings back some of those feelings and elements of having that time with your children.
Exactly. Especially as they all start leaving the nest, Kurt. It's not easy.
No, I know. We have one off in college and the other freshman in high school. So yeah.
Okay, Wes, you're on the hot seat, man.
Oh man,
you got 2 artists. What are you going to take with you?
So I'm gonna. I have a little recency bias here because I just watched A Complete Unknown, which is the Bob Dylan biopic, and I've
You
not.
want to take Timothy Chalamet with you?
Wait, is that an option? Yeah, like I'm familiar with his music, but I wasn't, like I didn't know as much about him as probably I should have. And so I've done a little more digging since then.
Mm.
And I think just the writing, the poetry of it, and it sort of spans so many, his catalog spans so many,
Yeah.
styles. And so I feel like that would be if I was in a desert island and I could only have one person's catalog. First of all, it's a really extensive catalog. So I
Yes,
don't think you'd
yes.
get bored,
Yeah.
and it's varied and it's beautiful. And so I feel like that would be a solid choice if you had to pick only a couple. I'm also like a really big Guns N' Roses fan. And so I think I'd probably I'd have to have that. I don't know if I could go the rest of my life without listening to Sweet Child of Mine.
Little Axl Rose in there,
Yeah.
and the Slash, and yeah, there you go. I love the idea though of bringing Dylan, because as you said, he has such a wide range and it is so in depth, and if you're not familiar with it, part of what I like about music is the discovery part. And so like when Tim and I have asked ourselves this question, and when we've had done different things, and oftentimes I bring in somebody who's maybe newer to me, because I want to be able to hear something for the first time, maybe, or hear something and really dig into it. And Tamara, I'm also a lyrics person, so Tim will go with the classical stuff, and I go, I don't get that. There's no words. I don't know how you do that. So,
well, not always, but it
but
was
there
written.
is a language to it,
Yeah.
That's true.
Well
That
said.
is true.
Well said, Wes. Yeah, yeah. Oh, Tamara, Wes, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful having you guys as guests on Behavior Gurus today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much
Thank
for
you
having
for a great
us.
conversation.
Yeah, really
this was fun.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Wes and Tamara, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our following the bride brains.
Following the bride. Wow. Okay, so that wasn't exactly where I thought you were going, but you're kind of following up on the comment about everybody follows the bride. Like they're looking for the bride's emotional well-being at the wedding to see
On
how
our
she's
brain,
doing.
follow the bride, right? That the
Yeah,
brain
that's
and
right.
the emotions that we get and
Yeah.
how we think. And so again, we follow the leader. That's the piece. We follow those people that are up in front, and our brains instinctively, naturally do that.
Which
Would you
is,
agree? Is that, am
I
I off?
do. No, I do. I absolutely do. From the negative side, we've got the Bobo effect of
Oh,
when idiots come into play and act as leaders, people follow along with that, and then we have the more virtuous side as well.
yeah.
So I think that there's definitely great examples on both sides.
Okay. In case any of our listeners don't know the Bobo effect, explain the Bobo doll and what you're talking about there.
So I think it was a study done in the 60s, possibly late 50s or 1960s, where it's about growth and the psychological learning, early childhood development stuff. And the researchers brought a bunch of kids into a room to play, and they have a whole bunch of toys, and so they're just playing. And you know, these are like 6 to 8 year olds, I think, and the general age. Kids float around and play with different toys, and then they have a Confederate come in, an adult come in, and there's a towel doll that they called the Bobo doll, that was a tall, air filled thing with the sand on the bottom. So you could hit it and it would spring right back because the sand on the bottom would cause it. And
Mm-hmm.
so they'd have this adult would come in and punch the Bobo doll really aggressively, really hard, really mean, and just really beat the daylights out of it and then leave. And then they would just observe to see if there were any kids that follow that. And the fact was they did, that there were a bunch of kids, mostly boys, of course, that followed along. And when there was that example of the Confederate coming in and beating up the Bobo doll, kids were more willing to be aggressive, not only with the Bobo doll, but with each other. compared to when there was no example of a Confederate coming in and being an ass, then the kids were fine. And so
Yeah.
if we have a leader who is an ass, who likes to beat up the Bobo doll, it's very possible that there's going to be people in the organization who go, "That's okay, I can do that." I
Yeah.
have, yeah,
And I mean, you look at organizations and you can tell a lot about that organization and the culture and the people that are attracted to it, but also then what we are primed to do by the actions of those leaders. And we follow the bride, we follow
yeah,
that up there. And to your point, this is both on the negative side as well as on the virtuous side. So it's not all doom and gloom, but we
no,
do know that emotions are contagious. We do know that people look up to their leader as the example that they need to follow. And we can drive what that culture is often by just making sure that the leader is doing the right things. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It very much. Okay, so what struck you about this conversation you want to groove on, Kurt?
Well, I like the
Yeah,
bride thing, obviously there was that. I think there's a lot of interest. First off, fantastic conversation. Wes and
yeah,
Tamara are fantastic, wonderful, insightful people,
yeah.
bringing in all sorts of great examples. Their book was really good. I really enjoyed that conversation. One of the things that struck me and I found really interesting on this, and it was one of these contrast and compare kind of things, right? Is that the three C's, this idea of um, community, connection, no,
And
connection,
a
um,
challenge.
challenge, and contribution,
Yeah,
how that aligns with the 4 drive model, which we've talked about on the show before, and is one of the models that I often use. You use it as well in work with clients. This idea
yeah,
that employees are motivated by 4 underlying drives. Obviously, there's more than that, but when you kind of look at things, there's 4 key underlying drives, and those drives, which was developed by Lawrence and Noria, um, 2 Harvard professors back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And so those 4 drives are acquire and achieve, which is about the rewards that we get. We do things, right? This, if you're thinking about motivation and engagement, we do things because we get paid, we get a bonus, we have incentives, we can earn
right.
the gold star, whatever it would be. It's achievement and recognition as well. All of that is there. Then there's bond and belong. Bonding and belonging is we're social creatures, and we want to feel like we're part of a team and that we have close relationships with those people we work with, and we will do a lot to maintain those positive relationships. The third is challenge and comprehend, which is that we're driven to, we're novelty seeking, we're challenge seeking, we want to learn, we have all of these desires of making sure that we're growing and kind of expanding. And so this idea, I've often described it as my video game, right? If I keep going, I go in a video game and I get level 1 and it's hard, and finally I overcome it and I get level 1 so I can do it over and over again. If I get to level 2 and it's the same challenge, I'm not going to
Yeah,
have it's like I'm going to get bored with that really quickly,
because it really won't
particularly
be
if
a challenge.
it won't
Yeah.
be a challenge anymore, right? So
Mhm.
we get bored if there's not a challenge. And then lastly is define and defend, which is, hey, we were tribal, we defend the tribe, we don't have tribes, so organizations can become a surrogate tribe. But also within that is the define, and the define is we're going to more likely defend the tribe if we identify with the tribe, if our purpose aligns with
Right.
with the organization's purpose. So it's understanding our purpose and different pieces of that.
I,
So
I just want to say for listeners, if you're not familiar with the 4 drive model, what Kurt just laid out is an example of really great work by Nitin and Maria, or excuse me,
Lawrence
Nitin
and
Maria
Maria.
and
Yeah.
Lawrence and Maria. but it follows the ABCD. So if you weren't paying attention, it is ABCD. These are the 4 drives, so it makes it a little easier to remember as we go through. Okay, but the point of you bringing this up is because you saw some
So
connective
if you
tissue
look at
to
this,
the 3 C's.
right, community aligns really well with bond and belong. There is
Right,
there
right.
is a lot of overlap within that component of it.
Hmm.
Contribution is around that purpose, right? There's an
Yeah.
element of purpose. It's also could be seen as part of challenge, but challenge is rightly aligned. I mean, it uses the
With
same word.
challenge.
It brings that in. So when they were talking about it, I kept kind of going back and looking to see, there is a lot of overlap, and is there is there anything that stands out that's a little bit different? And I think there isn't a lot from those three. Obviously, the 3 C's don't have the acquire and achieve in it. They also don't have the defend part in it, and maybe
Yeah.
not as much in the idea of the challenge and comprehend about the learning aspect, the kind of novelty seeking piece that we do that kind of has been brought out by the 4 drives, or the original 4 drives don't have some of those in it. It's been redone by work that we've done as well as others in this area to kind of expand that, because we
Yeah.
we saw that it was missing a couple pieces. So
But what all of these do, what these 4 drives do, is they do add meaning to work. They help provide that platform for making work meaningful, right? Like
yeah,
this is important. It's not so much that there's always meaning in everything that each drive represents, but they absolutely provide the foundation for someone deriving meaning from their work.
yes,
You've also done some research to indicate that the more a company can hit on all 4 of those cylinders, the greater benefit that they get from it, right? That the
yeah.
employees
I
get
mean,
from it as well.
yeah, and this aligns again with something that uh,
Tamara and
Tamara
Wes
said.
said,
I
yeah,
think, yeah,
yeah,
and yeah, Wes might have said it as well. But this idea that if one of those C's is missing, it can have it can actually backfire on the other two. In other words,
yeah.
it can bring down. That's the similar component that they saw with 4 drives. Is and to this degree, there was a Harvard Business Review article with Nitin Noria, Groinsberg, and I'm drawing a blank on the third author on that. I apologize. Where they had done some work with this, and so they took the 4 drives and they put it into organizations, measured some different things, and what they found is that a 1% increase in the organizational kind of satisfaction of any one of the drives. So if it was acquire and achieve, if it was bond and belong, defend and define, they would get about a 3 to 4% increase in motivation or engagement, however they measured that. What happened though was that when they got a 1% increase across all 4 of them, there was an exponential impact. So all of a sudden,
Right,
it
right.
wasn't just 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, and you get a 12% increase in productivity. You saw a 30+% increase in productivity. So it's this idea that the one lacking actually pulls the other ones back down. But when you have all 4, you get this exponential impact on this. And I think it's the same thing that they were talking about, Wes and Tamara were talking about in the 3 C's.
It's a great example of the virtuous cycle that they talked about, where I think that what their work does is remind us that the old school model for management of I'm paying you enough, I've got a decent benefit package for you as an employee, and I've got a decent place to work, just do the damn job. That model of thinking needs to just be gone from our lexicon. There's no reason today to be thinking that if you just pay someone enough to do whatever job you want them to do, that they're going to be happy and will do the best job that they can.
Oh my
The
God.
virtual
Yeah.
the virtuous cycle indicates that providing meaningful work, especially as you're talking about it with the 4 drives, you get enhanced productivity. Management benefits from having people doing meaningful work and having a good place to do it.
And I find still to this day, this week, not we're doing interviews with some clients and talking with like the chief growth officer of a company,
Okay.
and
Top sales guy, basically, right?
top guy, right? One of the just below the CEO. And in that conversation with him, it was, well, we're paying them a salary, and that should be that should be enough for them. And
Yeah.
then we only, and it was this very old school, we're paying you, do as you're told. These are the responsibilities that you have as an employee. And because of this contract that we have, that we're paying you a base salary, you get an opportunity and an incentive and different things, that is more than enough. And we don't have to think about anything else. And if you are, then why are you working here? And it just it
Yeah. This we're paying you enough, so just do the damn job isn't just like a 1950s idea. It's like an 1850s idea. It's like, come on, get on board with the way the world is actually working. People want more out of their employers. They want more out of the work that they're doing.
and there's this, and I'm making a big jump, big kind of leap of kind of what I think is many times people from that at the top of the organization are looking at an organizational perspective, and they're understanding, hey, if we do this, that multiply the amount of time is going to take for managers to really focus in on this, and they're not focusing in on the job, and they're not focusing in on the numbers, or if we have to reward or recognize people, or we give people more time to bond and belong, maybe have more get-togethers or various different things. There's a financial cost to this,
There
and
is.
that's not what I'm being rewarded for. I'm being rewarded for this outcome. And so I can save money off of that bottom line by not doing these types of things. And oh, by the way, I don't see it in myself as being, I'm finding my own meaning here and I'm getting this. Well, that's the other big thing, is everybody isn't wired the same. And so we have to understand that the way that we show up at work isn't how everybody else shows up at work.
Exactly. I also was just thinking of data that we've seen from Gallup over the years. As a survey organization, has done a lot on employee engagement, and they discovered that a thank you note once a week, some kind of minimal recognition to employees, can reduce dissatisfaction and burnout by half. By half. It's
Yeah.
it's a tremendous statistic that when you think about something as simple as just saying, "Hey, I noticed you're doing a good job this week.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing it. Good work."
And it needs to be genuine. It can't just
Oh yeah,
be, oh,
yeah.
this is Friday. I write my thank you note and I'm just, all right, Tim, it's your turn this week. Boom, here we go. It needs to be meaningful. And I always say people have a really good bullshit detector, right? So
That's right.
if you
That's right.
are saying something, it needs to be genuine. It needs to come from somewhere. Now, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking. Like, oh my gosh, Tim, you did the most fantastic
No.
job ever. But Tim, I really appreciate, how you put together the notes for this week for what we're
Yeah.
grooving on. It was
Yeah.
fantastic, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I remember interviewing a senior leader at an organization that said, "I don't know what the problem is because I thank everyone on my team every single week, every Friday. Everybody gets a thank you from me." I was like, "Really?" I said, "Tell me about that." And he said, I sent out an email to the entire team, said, 20 some people report to me, and I say, "Thanks for doing a great job this week." Like, that's like, dude, if you think that's enough, you're we really like you need some kind of a psychological exam because
Oh
you're
my
missing
gosh.
it big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So what else? What else, Tim, did you find interesting from, because again, I think one of the really insightful things for me is really doubling down on some of these three C's now, and
Yeah.
particularly as they relate to
Yeah.
this and bringing that meaning part into, the work that I'm doing with organizations and different things. I'm going to take this and really use this moving forward. So,
Well, yeah. So I love that. We've talked a lot about the contribution side and the importance of recognizing employees, but there's also something about that challenge part, right? The challenge part is really important in the three C's, and it's important in the
four
four
drive.
drive as well, because we need to feel like we're not just doing the same thing over and over again. We're not on a treadmill. We're not finishing level one and then we're restarting level one. We need to,
They're calling it level two, but it's the same. It's the same treadmill. It's the same treadmill. It's the
yeah,
same
that's
treadmill.
that's not good. Like we need managers have a responsibility to think about the way we challenge employees in a way that allows people to stretch, to get
Yeah.
them to go beyond where they are.
And sometimes that's not just saying you have to do more.
Yeah,
This is an
right,
interesting
right.
piece. And this is one of the things I think people misinterpret this. It's not like, oh, and think about this in sales. It's really easy to think about, oh, you did 100 units last month. Now you have to do 110 this month. Now, there's always going to be that growth component, different things. That's
Yeah,
not always the challenge we're talking about. I mean, the challenge might be about how do I get in and see these customers? The challenge might be about learning a different role within the organization,
hmm,
and so that we can maybe have people who can cover for somebody else. The challenge might be about learning some new skill that
yep,
will help me maybe not sell directly, maybe not do anything else. Maybe it's a communication skill, maybe it's something else. There are so many different ways to tap into that challenge piece. And I think organizations get myopic in how they think about it. And that doesn't serve them well.
absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. Yep.
Okay. Uh, Anything else? There was something, and I can't remember uh, who said it, is that they didn't just show up, they lit up. And it was talking, I think it was Tamara when she said that. And it
Yeah,
was about meaningful work isn't just e- emotionally rewarding. They lit up.
yeah. That's a
That's
cool
an
idea.
interesting thing. And have you been in an organization where you see that? I have.
Yes.
I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen it where
Hmm.
it is, and it's fascinating when you see that happen. So
I've seen it in time to time on teams that I've been a part of, or organizations that I've been in. Not consistently, but it's there. And I think the really successful organizations get more of that on a regular basis because they're laying the foundation for the three C's to happen.
yeah. So I think maybe just talking about some maybe practical applications. We already talked about, hey, the element that you talked about recognizing people, but the other piece that you can do is just get to know the person on a different level than just work, particularly if you're a manager, showing that they're seen, that they are a human and not just one piece of the cog in the machinery that we're doing. And I
Yeah.
will take that not just as your immediate manager, but if you are a senior leader, this is key. And
Yeah.
too often, people feel like they're too busy. I don't have the time to go down 2, 3 levels below where I am to actually get to meet these people. And yet
Hmm.
we know, and we've seen this on, President's Club trips with top salespeople and different things. The One of the biggest rewards that people get is that I got to be seen and heard and talk with the executives,
Yep.
and that has so much motivation, so much engagement capability. It's huge. So
Yeah.
what
Absolutely.
what
Well,
else from a practical application, Tim?
Well, again, you mentioned that we've talked about recognizing people being authentic in their recognition, and then I just want to reinforce the stretch goals. This idea of really uh, giving people challenges with meaningful guardrails. By the
Yeah.
way, I think that unrealistic challenges of if you can just go out and just do this amazing work, we'll love you for it, or
Yeah.
don't cut someone loose just to be in the Wild West or on some kind of unknown frontier. Support them,
Yeah.
give them opportunities to succeed. Right?
Yeah.
I love having this idea of set people up for success.
Yeah, set them up for yeah, make it easy for them.
Yep.
One thing again, we'll put a link to the VIA character strengths assessment in the
Oh, that
show
is good.
notes.
Yep.
So if you're a employee, we definitely go out, identify that helps you identify your energizing strengths. And even as a leader, go ahead, and I think it's a great opportunity to go out and do that. But yeah, with that, anything else? Shall we wrap up the grooving part of this episode, Tim?
Yes. So just keep in mind that the three C's, this idea of community, contribution, and challenge, they don't just build better teams, they are the building blocks of better people.
Oh, I like that.
How about that?
Yeah. And research shows it's really, you know, just a simple thank you, asking about who they are, uh, getting the stretch goal. And it doesn't always have to be, a stretch goal of more, more, more. It can be expand, kind of looking outward and
Yeah.
wider as opposed to narrow and further. And, getting that moment of authentic interest can spark this virtuous cycle, energizes teams, energizes people, it transforms workplaces. And we need those virtuous cycles at work. And we need leaders to bear the responsibility to really get those cycles going.
Yeah. So whether you're an individual contributor or you're a people leader, the path to productivity really starts with finding meaning at work.
Yeah, and you can find meaning in your life by joining our behavioral group's Facebook community.
Yeah, of course.
You like that
That
little segue in there, where we
was
exchange ideas on how you might be better at finding and staying in your groove. So there we go. So until next time, next episode, we hope that you can take some of these insights from Wes and Tamara and use these as you go out and find your groove.